Jimmy Page has spent 8 decades on this planet, and he still hasn't told us everything. At 81 years old, living inside one of London's most extraordinary Victorian mansions, the man who architected the sound of an entire generation sits surrounded by decades of unreleased recordings, original master tapes, and a story that most people have only ever heard half of. Forbes recently named Led Zeppelin the greatest rock band of all time, with Page as its defining force. And yet the full picture of who Jimmy Page actually is, where he came from, what he built, and what it cost him, rarely gets told in one place. So let's tell it properly. It starts in 1956, in a house on Miles Road in Epsom, Surrey. A 12-year-old boy named James Patrick Page found an acoustic guitar that a previous tenant had abandoned. Nobody came to claim it. He picked it up, and for the next 60-plus years, he never really put it down. He taught himself almost entirely by ear, listening obsessively to Scotty Moore, Elmore James, and Lonnie Donegan. By 13, he was on BBC television performing with his skiffle group. By 15, he'd left school after clashing with a deputy head teacher who openly dismissed his musical ambitions. He walked out with 4 O-levels and an unshakable sense of direction. What followed was one of the most quietly remarkable careers in British music history. Through the early 1960s, Page became the session guitarist that London's recording industry couldn't function without. He played on records for The Who, The Kinks, Donovan, Tom Jones, Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger, and early David Bowie recordings. Often uncredited, always essential. Industry estimates suggest he appeared on around 60% of all UK top 10 recordings between 1963 and 1965. He was the most important musician most people had never heard of. Then Led Zeppelin happened. After a series of near misses, turning down the Yardbirds twice out of loyalty to Eric Clapton, watching a potential supergroup collapse over contractual problems, Page assembled 4 musicians in a basement beneath a record shop on Gerrard Street in London in August 1968. Robert Plant, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones. They played together once. That was enough. Within months they were touring America. Within years they had rewritten what a rock band could demand from an industry. 90% of concert gate receipts. Their own record label, total creative control. 9 studio albums, 6 of them reaching #1 in the United States. Led Zeppelin 4 alone has sold over 37 million copies. But the empire came at a price. Robert Plant's young son died suddenly in 1977. John Bonham was found dead at Page's rented house in Windsor in September 1980, aged 32. Led Zeppelin dissolved 3 months later. The thing Page had spent his life building was simply gone. The road back was long and not always smooth. It also has shadows that deserve honest acknowledgement. Allegations have circulated for decades and have resurfaced with particular intensity since the Me Too movement, concerning Page's reported relationship with a 14-year-old girl in the early 1970s. These remain allegations. Page has never publicly addressed them. They are part of the historical record and cannot responsibly be erased from any serious account of his life. What exists today is a man who is sober, productive, and by most accounts genuinely content, living in the Victorian Gothic mansion he outbid David Bowie to own, in a long-term relationship with the poet Scarlett Sabet, and still sitting on an archive whose full contents only he knows. The guitar that nobody claimed made the boy who claimed everything. If that story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.